The morning mist hung low over the palace grounds as Camilla stood at her bedroom window, watching the guards change shifts below. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the curtain, knowing this would be one of the last times she'd see this view. 3 suitcases sat packed behind her, hidden beneath dusty covers in the corner of her private chamber. For weeks she had been planning this moment, carefully selecting only the most precious items that held memories of a life she was about to leave behind. The decision hadn't come easily. After months of increasing tension within the royal household, Camilla had reached her breaking point. The constant scrutiny, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room, and the growing distance she felt from those she once considered family had taken their toll. She had tried to adapt, to find her place within the ancient traditions and rigid protocols, but each day felt more suffocating than the last. Her sister Margaret had been the one to suggest the idea during their last secret phone call. "You don't have to stay there, Camilla," she had whispered into the phone. "There are people who care about you outside those palace walls. Come home to us, even if it's just for a while." The word home had struck something deep within Camilla's heart. When had the palace stopped feeling like home and started feeling like a beautiful prison? The plan was simple enough. She would tell the household staff she was feeling unwell and needed to rest. While the family attended their afternoon engagements, she would slip away through the servants' entrance where Margaret would be waiting with a car. They would drive to the airport, and by evening she would be on a plane to Canada, where her elderly aunt had offered her a small cottage by the lake. It would give her time to think, to breathe, to remember who she was before all of this. Camilla had spent the previous evening writing letters. One to Charles explaining her feelings and asking for his understanding. Another to the Queen expressing her gratitude for the years of acceptance but her need for space. The hardest letter had been to her stepchildren, trying to explain in words that wouldn't hurt them why she needed to step away from their lives temporarily. She had sealed each letter carefully and placed them in her desk drawer, to be found after her departure. As she prepared for what she hoped would be a quiet exit, Camilla reflected on the events that had led to this moment. The recent charity gala had been particularly difficult. She had worked for months planning the event, ensuring every detail was perfect, only to overhear 2 senior courtiers discussing how unsuitable she was for royal duties. The words had cut deeper than she cared to admit, especially since she had been trying so hard to prove herself worthy of the position she had never asked for. The weight of constant judgment had become unbearable. Every outfit was scrutinized, every public appearance analyzed, every word she spoke dissected by the media and palace insiders alike. She longed for the days when she could simply be herself, when her biggest worry was whether her garden roses would bloom properly or if her book club would enjoy their monthly selection. Margaret had reminded her during their conversation that she was still young enough to start over, to find happiness on her own terms. "You married for love, Camilla, but love shouldn't require you to disappear as a person," her sister had said. Those words had resonated deeply, confirming what Camilla had been feeling but couldn't quite articulate. She had chosen her traveling clothes carefully that morning. A simple navy dress that wouldn't draw attention, comfortable shoes for walking, and her mother's pearl earrings for comfort. In her handbag she carried her passport, some cash she had quietly saved over the months, and a small photo of her late mother. Everything else she was leaving behind felt like symbols of a life that had never quite fit her properly. The clock on her mantel chimed 11 times, signaling that her departure time was approaching. According to her carefully planned schedule, the family would be leaving for their afternoon appointments within the hour, giving her the perfect window to slip away unnoticed. Her heart raced as she thought about the freedom waiting for her beyond the palace gates. Camilla took one last look around her chambers, memorizing details she might miss during her time away. The antique writing desk where she had penned countless thank you notes, the comfortable reading chair by the fireplace where she had spent many quiet evenings, and the photographs on her dresser showing happier moments from her early days as part of the royal family. She whispered a quiet goodbye to the room that had been both sanctuary and cage, then moved toward her hidden luggage. Each suitcase represented a different aspect of the life she was taking with her. One filled with practical clothes and necessities, another with personal mementos and books, and the third with gifts from family and friends that she couldn't bear to leave behind. As she prepared to move her bags to the designated meeting point near the servants' quarters, Camilla felt a mixture of sadness and excitement. She was leaving behind everything familiar, but she was also moving toward the possibility of rediscovering herself. The little cottage by the lake represented more than just a temporary retreat. It symbolized hope for a future where she could wake up each morning without feeling the weight of expectations she had never been able to fully meet. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside her door made her pause. She held her breath, listening as they passed by, reminding her that timing would be crucial for her plan to succeed. In just a few more minutes, she would begin the most daring thing she had ever attempted, walking away from a life of privilege and protocol in search of something more precious than any crown or title, her own sense of peace and authenticity. The moment had arrived. Camilla carefully lifted the first suitcase from its hiding place, surprised by how heavy it felt now that her departure was imminent. Every item inside represented a piece of her identity she refused to abandon, even if everything else about her life was about to change dramatically. She moved slowly, conscious that any unusual sound might alert the household staff to her activities. Her personal maid, Sarah, had been given the afternoon off under the pretense that Camilla needed complete rest and privacy. Sarah had seemed concerned about her mistress's pale complexion and quiet demeanor over the past few days, but Camilla had assured her that a peaceful afternoon alone would restore her spirits. The lie had come easily, though it left a bitter taste in her mouth. Sarah had been nothing but kind and loyal during her time at the palace. As Camilla maneuvered the second suitcase toward her door, she heard the distant sound of car engines starting in the main courtyard. The family was leaving for their afternoon engagements just as she had anticipated. Charles had mentioned during breakfast that he would be visiting a local hospital to open a new wing, while other family members had various charitable commitments throughout the city. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. She waited for the sounds to fade completely before opening her door and peering into the hallway. The ornate corridor, usually bustling with activity, was blissfully empty. Even the ever-present security personnel seemed to have been reassigned to accompany the departing family members. This was her chance, perhaps the only one she would get. Moving as quietly as possible, Camilla began the delicate process of transporting her luggage through the palace's winding corridors toward the servants' quarters. The palace, which she had learned to navigate over the years, suddenly felt like a maze designed to trap her. Every creak of the ancient floorboards beneath her feet sounded thunderous in the silence. The first suitcase made the journey successfully. She tucked it behind a large laundry cart near the servants' entrance, where Margaret would be able to help her load it quickly into the waiting car. The rush of adrenaline she felt upon completing this first stage of her escape plan was unlike anything she had experienced in years. For the first time in months, she felt truly alive and in control of her own destiny. Returning for the second bag, Camilla allowed herself a moment to appreciate the irony of her situation. Here she was, a member of one of the world's most prominent families, sneaking through service corridors like a common thief. But rather than feeling diminished by the necessity of secrecy, she felt empowered by her own courage to take action. The second suitcase proved more challenging to transport. Its wheels caught on the edge of an antique carpet runner, creating a sound that echoed through the hallway. Camilla froze, her heart pounding as she listened for any sign that someone had heard. After what felt like an eternity, she continued her careful journey, moving even more slowly than before. As she navigated a particularly narrow section of the corridor, Camilla encountered her first obstacle. Mrs. Henderson, the head housekeeper, emerged from a storage room carrying fresh linens. The older woman's eyes widened in surprise at seeing Camilla in this part of the palace, especially with luggage in tow. "Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice filled with confusion. "Are you going somewhere?" "I wasn't informed of any travel arrangements." Camilla's mind raced as she searched for a plausible explanation. "Oh, Mrs. Henderson, I'm just moving some personal items to the guest suite. I thought a change of scenery might help with my recent headaches." The lie felt clumsy, but Mrs. Henderson's expression softened with concern. "Of course, Your Highness. Would you like me to have some of the staff assist you? That bag looks quite heavy." "No, thank you," Camilla replied quickly. "The doctor suggested light exercise might be beneficial. I don't mind managing on my own." Mrs. Henderson nodded, though she still looked puzzled. "Very well. I do hope you feel better soon. Perhaps some tea later?" "That would be lovely," Camilla agreed, knowing she would be hundreds of miles away by tea time. After Mrs. Henderson disappeared around a corner, Camilla released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The encounter had shaken her confidence, but she pressed forward. Only one more suitcase remained, and then she would be free to meet Margaret and begin her journey toward a new life. The third and final bag contained her most precious possessions: her mother's jewelry, family photographs, and the small collection of books that had provided comfort during difficult times. As she lifted it from its hiding place, Camilla felt the weight of everything she was leaving behind. But she also felt the lightness of possibility, the promise of days ahead when she could wake up without the suffocating pressure of living up to everyone else's expectations. This last trip through the corridors felt different. With each step, Camilla was walking away from a life that had never quite fit her properly, and toward the unknown but hopeful future that awaited her beyond the palace walls. The servants' entrance, which had always seemed like just another doorway, now represented the threshold between her constrained present and her liberated future. Margaret would be waiting just outside, probably checking her watch and wondering if Camilla had changed her mind. But there was no turning back now. Too much had led to this moment. Too many sleepless nights. Too many occasions when she had felt like an outsider in her own home. Too many times when she had looked in the mirror and failed to recognize the person staring back at her. As she approached the servants' entrance with her final piece of luggage, Camilla could see daylight streaming through the frosted glass windows. Freedom was just steps away, and with it the chance to rediscover who she truly was beneath all the titles and expectations that had been placed upon her shoulders. Just as Camilla reached for the handle of the servants' entrance, her heart nearly stopped. Standing directly in her path was Commander Morrison, the head of palace security, flanked by 2 junior guards. His stern expression and crossed arms made it clear that her carefully planned escape had been discovered. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the window seemed to mock her as freedom slipped away just moments before she could grasp it. "Your Royal Highness," Commander Morrison said in his crisp military tone, "I'm afraid I cannot allow you to leave the premises at this time." Camilla's hand remained frozen on her suitcase handle as she tried to process what was happening. "I beg your pardon, Commander. I was simply going for a walk in the gardens." Even as she spoke, she knew how ridiculous her explanation sounded given the 3 pieces of luggage surrounding her. "Ma'am, with respect, we're aware of your travel plans. We've been monitoring the situation for the past several days." Commander Morrison's voice remained professional, but there was an undertone of disappointment that cut through Camilla like a blade. "I've been instructed to ensure your safety and security, which includes preventing any unauthorized departures from the palace grounds." The words hit Camilla like physical blows. They had known. Somehow, despite all her careful planning and secrecy, the palace security apparatus had been watching her every move. She thought about her phone calls with Margaret, her secret packing sessions, her research into flights to Canada. How much had they seen? How long had they been treating her like a potential security risk rather than a family member? Instructed by whom? Camilla asked, though she dreaded the answer. Commander Morrison's expression softened slightly, recognizing the pain in her voice. "I'm not at liberty to discuss the specific details, Your Highness. However, I can tell you that the decision comes from the highest levels of the household. Your safety and the security of the institution are our primary concerns." One of the junior guards stepped forward and began reaching for her luggage. The sight of his hands on her personal belongings triggered something fierce within Camilla. "Don't touch those," she said sharply, surprising everyone, including herself, with the authority in her voice. "Those are my private possessions. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we need to inspect the contents and return them to your chambers," the guard replied gently but firmly. "It's protocol for any attempted unauthorized departure." Watching strangers handle her carefully packed belongings felt like the final violation of her privacy and autonomy. The suitcase containing her mother's jewelry was opened first, and Camilla winced as official hands rifled through the intimate items she had chosen to take with her. Each piece told a story of her life before the palace, memories of a simpler time when her biggest worry was whether she had enough milk for her morning tea. "Commander Morrison," Camilla said, trying to maintain her composure despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "May I ask who will be informed of this incident?" "That's not my decision to make, Your Highness. I'm simply following orders to ensure your safety and prevent any actions that might compromise the security of the royal household." The word security kept being used as a weapon against her. Camilla realized. Her desire for freedom and autonomy had been reframed as a threat to be neutralized rather than a cry for help to be addressed. She wondered if anyone had bothered to ask why she felt the need to escape, or if they had simply focused on preventing her from doing so. Margaret would be waiting outside, probably growing concerned as the minutes ticked by past their agreed meeting time. Camilla's heart ached thinking about her sister's worry and the phone call she would have to make to explain that she wouldn't be coming home after all. The cottage by the lake would remain empty, waiting for a guest who would never arrive. As the guards continued their methodical examination of her belongings, Camilla noticed they were photographing certain items. The violation felt complete. Not only was she being prevented from leaving, but evidence of her escape attempt was being documented for future reference. She realized that this moment would follow her for the rest of her time at the palace, a permanent mark against her character and loyalty. "Commander, how long have you known about my plans?" she asked quietly. He paused in his supervision of the luggage inspection. "We became aware of unusual patterns in your behavior approximately 1 week ago, Your Highness. Increased phone activity, requests for time alone, changes in your normal routine. Our job is to notice these things. 1 week. For 7 days, they had been watching her while she believed she was acting in secret. The realization made her feel foolish and naive. How could she have thought she could outsmart a security system designed to monitor threats to one of the world's most protected families? But the deeper wound was understanding that she was now viewed as a potential threat, rather than someone who simply needed understanding and space. The junior guard had moved on to her second suitcase, the one containing her books and personal mementos. Watching him handle her copy of Jane Austen's Persuasion, the same book her mother had read to her as a child, felt like watching someone desecrate something sacred. These weren't just possessions being inspected. They were pieces of her soul being examined and catalogued. "What happens now?" Camilla asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Your belongings will be returned to your chambers, and we'll need to have a conversation about enhanced security measures," Commander Morrison replied. "The family will be notified upon their return from their afternoon engagements. Enhanced security measures." The phrase suggested that her already limited freedom would be further curtailed. She imagined additional guards, monitored communications, and the constant awareness that every action was being evaluated for signs of future escape attempts. The palace, which had felt like a prison before, would now become a maximum security facility designed specifically to contain her. As the last of her belongings were repacked into the suitcases by unfamiliar hands, Camilla felt something fundamental shift inside her. The woman who had packed those bags in hope and determination was gone, replaced by someone who understood that her dreams of autonomy had been nothing more than illusions. The palace had revealed its true nature, not as a home or even a workplace, but as a beautiful, ornate cage from which there would be no escape. The walk back to her chambers felt like a funeral procession. Commander Morrison led the way while 2 guards flanked Camilla, carrying her repacked suitcases as evidence of her failed rebellion. The ornate corridors that had once seemed beautiful now felt like the walls of an elaborate tomb, decorated to disguise their true purpose of containment. Every portrait of past royals seemed to stare down at her with disapproval, as if she had betrayed centuries of tradition with her desperate attempt at freedom. Sarah was waiting in Camilla's chambers when they arrived, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. The loyal maid had obviously been summoned back from her afternoon off, probably with some carefully worded explanation about a security situation requiring her immediate return. Camilla could see the questions in Sarah's eyes, but protocol prevented her from asking them directly. "Sarah," Commander Morrison said formally, "Her Royal Highness will be remaining in her chambers for the rest of the afternoon. Please ensure she has everything she needs for her comfort." The coded language wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Camilla was now under house arrest within her own home, though no one would ever use such harsh terminology. She would be confined, monitored, and controlled, all under the guise of ensuring her comfort and safety. The irony was so bitter she could taste it. After the guards left with her luggage, Sarah approached carefully. "Your Highness, may I bring you some tea? You look quite pale." Camilla sank into her reading chair, the same one where she had spent countless evenings dreaming of escape. "Tea would be lovely, Sarah, thank you." As Sarah busied herself with the tea service, Camilla stared out the window toward the palace gates. Somewhere beyond those walls, Margaret was probably still waiting, checking her phone for messages that would never come. Eventually, her sister would realize something had gone wrong and drive home alone, leaving the empty seat meant for Camilla as a symbol of dreams that would never be fulfilled. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor made both women look toward the door. Charles had returned early from his hospital visit, no doubt summoned by Commander Morrison's report. Camilla's heart raced as she prepared for a confrontation that would determine the course of her future within the palace walls. Charles entered without knocking, his face grave with disappointment and concern. Behind him came two senior advisors whose presence indicated this was not merely a personal matter between husband and wife, but an official palace crisis requiring formal management. Camilla remained seated, partly from exhaustion and partly from a newfound defiance that surprised her. "Camilla," Charles said, his voice heavy with emotions she couldn't quite identify. "We need to talk." Sarah immediately excused herself, leaving Camilla alone with three men who held her fate in their hands. The power dynamic in the room was unmistakable, and Camilla realized that any illusion of equality in her marriage had just been permanently shattered. She was not a partner to be consulted, but a problem to be managed. "I suppose you want an explanation," Camilla said quietly, meeting Charles's eyes with as much dignity as she could muster. "What I want," Charles replied, taking a seat across from her, "is to understand how we reached this point. Why didn't you come to me if you were unhappy? Why resort to such drastic measures?" One of the advisors, Sir Geoffrey, cleared his throat. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps it would be helpful to understand the full scope of the security breach. We need to assess what information might have been compromised and what measures are necessary going forward." The clinical terminology made Camilla's blood boil. "Security breach?" she repeated, standing up despite her exhaustion. "Is that what my unhappiness has become? A threat to be neutralized rather than a cry for help to be addressed?" Charles looked genuinely surprised by her outburst. "Camilla, no one sees you as a threat. But your actions today could have had serious consequences. What if something had happened to you? What if your departure had been misinterpreted by the media or hostile forces? What if I had simply been allowed to visit my family for a few weeks?" Camilla countered. "What if someone had asked me why I felt the need to escape, rather than simply preventing me from doing so?" Sir Geoffrey exchanged a meaningful look with his colleague before speaking. "Your Royal Highness, with respect, informal departures are not possible given your position. There are protocols for travel, security arrangements that must be made, official notifications required. You cannot simply disappear without consequences for the institution." The word institution hung in the air like a curse. Camilla realized that in their minds she had ceased to be a person with feelings and needs, and had become a component of a larger machine that required careful maintenance and control. Her individual happiness was secondary to the smooth operation of the monarchy. "So what happens now?" Camilla asked, sinking back into her chair. "Am I to be imprisoned here? Watched constantly? Treated like a security risk?" Charles leaned forward, and for a moment his official composure cracked to reveal the man she had once loved. "Camilla, I don't want this to be adversarial. I want to understand what's wrong and fix it. But I can't do that if you won't talk to me. I wrote you a letter," she said softly. "It's in my desk drawer." "Everything I couldn't say to your face is in there." While Charles retrieved and read the letter, Camilla watched his expression change from concern to understanding to something that might have been regret. The advisors waited patiently, probably calculating the public relations implications of whatever revelations the letter contained. "You feel like you're disappearing," Charles said after finishing the letter. "You feel like you've lost yourself in trying to become what everyone else wants you to be." Camilla nodded, tears threatening for the first time since her capture. "I wake up every morning wondering who I'm supposed to be that day. I go to sleep every night feeling like I've failed at being someone I never wanted to become." The second advisor, Mr. Pemberton, spoke for the first time. "Your Royal Highness, perhaps we could arrange for some additional support. A counselor. Maybe some adjusted duties that better align with your interests." "What I need," Camilla said firmly, "is time away from here. Time to remember who I am when I'm not being watched and evaluated and managed every moment of every day." The silence that followed her statement was heavy with unspoken implications. Everyone in the room understood that what she was asking for was essentially impossible, given the constraints of royal life. The institution that had welcomed her as Charles's wife would not allow her the luxury of self-discovery at the expense of stability and continuity. "We'll find a solution," Charles said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "But Camilla, you must understand that simply running away cannot be an option. There are other people to consider, other consequences beyond your personal happiness." And there it was, Camilla thought. The fundamental truth of her situation laid bare. Her personal happiness would always be secondary to larger considerations, her individual needs subordinated to institutional requirements. The cottage by the lake would remain forever out of reach, not because it was impossible to get there, but because the cost of the journey was deemed too high by people who would never have to pay it themselves. The days following Camilla's failed escape attempt passed in a strange, suspended reality. The palace maintained its usual rhythm of activities and appointments, but underneath the polished surface everything had changed. Camilla could feel the shift in how people looked at her, spoke to her, moved around her. She had become something fragile and unpredictable that required careful handling. Sarah now knocked before entering rooms where Camilla was present, even though she had never done so before. The household staff maintained their professional courtesy, but there was a new distance in their interactions, as if they had been briefed on appropriate boundaries with someone who might attempt another, unauthorized departure. Even the palace cat seemed to avoid her favorite sitting areas, as if animals could sense the invisible barriers that had been erected around her. Commander Morrison had implemented what he diplomatically called enhanced personal protection protocols. In practical terms, this meant Camilla was never truly alone. When she walked in the gardens, a discreet security officer maintained visual contact from a respectful distance. When she visited the palace library, someone always seemed to be reorganizing books nearby. Her phone calls were still permitted, but she noticed a slight delay that suggested monitoring, and her internet access had been subtly restricted. The most painful change was in her relationship with Charles. He had become solicitous in a way that felt more like careful management than genuine affection. He asked about her feelings with the studied concern of someone following professional advice rather than speaking from the heart. Their conversations had taken on a theatrical quality, as if they were both playing roles in a carefully scripted production designed to maintain the appearance of marital harmony. Margaret had called twice since the incident, both conversations clearly anticipated and probably recorded. Camilla had been forced to explain that her travel plans had been postponed indefinitely due to unexpected commitments. Her sister's confusion and disappointment were evident even through the diplomatic language they both felt compelled to use. The cottage by the lake was quietly taken off the market, Margaret reported, since the expected guest would not be arriving. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell arrived on a Tuesday morning, introduced as a wellness consultant who would be helping Camilla navigate the unique challenges of royal life. The middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a gentle manner was obviously a psychiatrist, though no one used that word directly. Camilla appreciated the attempt at discretion, even as she resented the implication that her desire for freedom was a medical condition requiring treatment. Their first session took place in Camilla's private sitting room, with tea served on the finest china as if this were a social visit rather than a therapeutic intervention. Dr. Hartwell's approach was refreshingly direct compared to the elaborate euphemisms everyone else employed when discussing her situation. "How are you feeling?" "About the changes in your daily routine?" Dr. Hartwell asked, acknowledging the increased security measures without specifically naming them. "Like a museum piece that tried to walk away and had to be returned to its proper display case," Camilla replied, surprising herself with the honesty of her response. Dr. Hartwell made a note but didn't seem shocked by the comparison. "That's a powerful image. Tell me more about what it feels like to be on display." For the first time in weeks, Camilla felt heard rather than managed. "Every decision I make is evaluated by people I've never met based on criteria I don't understand. I can't choose my own clothes without considering how they'll photograph. I can't express an opinion without wondering how it will affect the reputation of the institution. I can't even pack a suitcase without it becoming a security incident." "It sounds exhausting," Dr. Hartwell observed. "It is. And the worst part is that everyone treats my exhaustion as a character flaw, rather than a natural response to an impossible situation." Over the following weeks, Dr. Hartwell became the only person in Camilla's life who seemed interested in her well-being as an individual rather than as a component of the royal machine. Their sessions became an oasis of authenticity in a desert of performance and protocol. But even this small freedom came with restrictions. Their conversations were limited to twice-weekly meetings, and Camilla suspected that summaries of her progress were being shared with palace officials. The Queen requested a private audience 3 weeks after the incident. Camilla had been dreading this moment, knowing that the conversation would determine her long-term fate within the royal family. She dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that conveyed respect and stability, rather than the rebellion that had led to her current circumstances. The Queen's private study was intimidating in its understated elegance, filled with centuries of history and tradition that seemed to dwarf individual concerns. Her Majesty was seated behind an antique desk when Camilla entered, her expression unreadable but not unkind. "Please sit down, Camilla," the Queen said, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. "I believe we have several things to discuss." Camilla took her seat, acutely aware that this conversation would likely determine whether she remained part of the royal family or became a permanent prisoner within it. The Queen's reputation for directness was legendary, and Camilla braced herself for uncomfortable truths. "I've read the reports about your recent difficulties," the Queen began, "and I've spoken with Charles about your letter. I want you to know that I understand, perhaps better than you might think, the challenges of finding one's place within this institution." The admission surprised Camilla. She had always seen the Queen as someone who had never questioned her role or struggled with the constraints of royal life. "Your Majesty, I never intended to cause such disruption. I simply felt I was disappearing as a person." "The feeling is not uncommon," the Queen replied. "I've witnessed several family members struggle with similar challenges over the years. Some have found ways to adapt and thrive, others have not." The implication was clear. Camilla's future depended on her ability to find accommodation with a system that would not fundamentally change to suit her needs. "What are my options?" Camilla asked directly. The Queen folded her hands on the desk. "You can continue as you have been, with the additional support systems we've put in place. Dr. Hartwell speaks highly of your progress. Commander Morrison believes the security protocols can be gradually relaxed as trust is rebuilt. Charles is committed to finding ways to make your role more fulfilling." "And if I can't adapt?" Camilla asked, though she dreaded the answer. "Then we would need to consider more formal arrangements for your situation," the Queen replied diplomatically. "The institution must be protected, but we are not in the business of keeping unwilling participants." Camilla understood the euphemism. If she couldn't learn to be content within the golden cage, more permanent restrictions would be necessary to prevent future escape attempts or public embarrassments. The choice was adaptation, or a lifetime of beautiful imprisonment. The autumn months brought a gradual thawing of the restrictions that had surrounded Camilla since her failed escape attempt. Commander Morrison, true to his word, slowly reduced the obvious security measures as she demonstrated her commitment to adapting rather than fleeing. The discreet officers who had shadowed her movements were reassigned to less intrusive positions, and her internet access was quietly restored to its previous levels. But Camilla understood that this newfound freedom was conditional, dependent on her continued good behavior and acceptance of her circumstances. Dr. Hartwell's sessions had evolved from crisis intervention to what felt more like coaching for performance. In an impossibly demanding role, together they developed strategies for finding meaning and purpose within the constraints of royal life. Camilla learned to reframe her public duties not as impositions, but as opportunities to make genuine differences in people's lives. The charity work that had once felt like obligation began to take on deeper significance as she discovered causes that genuinely resonated with her personal values. A breakthrough came during a visit to a women's shelter in London. Camilla found herself genuinely moved by the stories of women who had escaped dangerous situations and were rebuilding their lives with limited resources. For the first time in months, she felt a connection to something larger than her own struggles with palace life. These women had faced real danger and genuine hardship, making her own comfortable confinement seem almost trivial by comparison. "I'd like to do more than just visit," she told Charles that evening. "I want to establish an ongoing relationship with organizations like this. Not just ceremonial appearances, but real involvement in their work." Charles seemed genuinely pleased by her initiative. That sounds wonderful, Camilla. What did you have in mind? I want to learn about the issues they're facing. Maybe help with fundraising, but also with policy advocacy. I want to use whatever influence I have to make a difference in their lives. It was the first time in months that Camilla had spoken about the future with enthusiasm rather than resignation. Charles recognized the significance of this shift and immediately began working with palace officials to develop a formal role that would allow Camilla to pursue this work while maintaining appropriate royal protocols. The project gave Camilla a sense of purpose she had been missing. She threw herself into learning about domestic violence, women's homelessness, and the challenges faced by single mothers trying to escape dangerous situations. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was working to help women gain their freedom, while learning to accept the limitations of her own. But the work felt meaningful in a way that cutting ribbons and attending galas never had. Margaret visited for the first time since the escape attempt, ostensibly to attend a charity luncheon, but really to assess her sister's state of mind. They walked in the palace gardens under the watchful but discreet eyes of security personnel, their conversation carefully casual for the benefit of anyone who might be listening. You seem different, Margaret observed. More settled somehow. I've learned to find happiness within the boundaries that exist, Camilla replied, choosing her words carefully. Fighting against immovable constraints only leads to exhaustion. Is that happiness real, or are you just becoming better at performing it? The question cut to the heart of Camilla's ongoing struggle. I'm not sure I know the difference anymore, she admitted. But I've found work that matters to me, and that makes the rest more bearable. Margaret nodded, understanding the coded message. Camilla had found a way to survive and even thrive within her circumstances, even if those circumstances were not of her own choosing. The cottage by the lake would remain a dream, but she had discovered other sources of meaning and satisfaction. Christmas brought the ultimate test of Camilla's adaptation. The annual royal Christmas celebration was a highly choreographed affair, with centuries of tradition behind every gesture and custom. For someone who had attempted to flee the constraints of royal life just months earlier, participating in this most formal of family gatherings required a level of performance that pushed her new coping strategies to their limits. But something had shifted in how Camilla approached the event. Instead of feeling trapped by the traditions, she began to see them as part of a larger story in which she played a meaningful role. The formal dinners and gift exchanges weren't just elaborate theater, but genuine expressions of family connection, even if that connection was constrained by protocol and public expectation. She found herself particularly drawn to the younger family members, who seemed to navigate the complexity of royal life with a naturalness she envied. Their ability to be genuine within the constraints of their positions offered her a model for finding authenticity without rebellion. The Queen noticed the change during their traditional Christmas Eve conversation. You seem to have found your footing, she observed with what might have been approval. I've learned to work within the system rather than against it, Camilla replied, and I've found ways to make my role meaningful to me personally. That's precisely what successful adaptation looks like, the Queen said. The institution doesn't change to accommodate individuals, but individuals can find ways to flourish within its constraints. As the Christmas season progressed, Camilla realized that her failed escape attempt had taught her something valuable about the nature of freedom. True liberation hadn't come from fleeing her circumstances, but from finding ways to create meaning and purpose within them. The palace would always be a kind of prison, but she had learned to be a contented prisoner rather than a resentful one. Dr. Hartwell helped her articulate this transformation during one of their sessions. You've shifted from trying to change your circumstances to changing your relationship with your circumstances, the doctor observed. That's a profound form of personal growth. I still dream about that cottage by the lake sometimes, Camilla admitted. But I've stopped seeing it as the only path to happiness. And how does that feel? Like growing up, I suppose. Like accepting that adult life requires compromises and finding ways to make those compromises meaningful. The winter months settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable for the first time since Camilla had joined the royal family. Her days were structured but purposeful, filled with work that mattered to her and relationships that, while formal, provided genuine connection and support. The enhanced security measures had become invisible through familiarity, and she no longer felt constantly watched and evaluated. But beneath the surface adaptation, something essential had been lost. The spontaneous, rebellious woman who had packed those suitcases in secret had been replaced by someone more careful, more controlled, more conscious of the boundaries that hemmed in her life. Whether this transformation represented maturity or a subtle form of defeat remained an open question that Camilla wasn't quite ready to answer. 2 years had passed since the incident that palace staff had learned to refer to simply as the misunderstanding. Camilla had settled into a life that observers might describe as successful, adaptation to royal duties, but privately, she understood it as something more complex, a careful balance between survival and surrender that allowed her to function within constraints she could never fully accept. Her work with women's shelters had expanded into a formal patronage that commanded genuine respect, both within and outside palace walls. The quarterly reports that crossed Charles's desk showed impressive fundraising numbers and policy impacts that reflected real change in the lives of vulnerable women. Camilla took pride in these accomplishments, even as she recognized they served multiple purposes, giving her meaningful work while demonstrating her value to the institution that constrained her. The security protocols had evolved into something almost invisible. Commander Morrison had been succeeded by a younger officer who understood that effective protection could be achieved without the obvious restrictions that had marked Camilla's early period of adjustment. She could now travel to her charity commitments with a freedom that felt almost normal, though she never forgot that this liberty was conditional and could be withdrawn if she gave any indication of being a flight risk. Dr. Hartwell Sessions had transitioned from crisis management to maintenance therapy, meeting monthly to monitor Camilla's psychological adaptation to royal life. These conversations had become less about addressing acute distress and more about maintaining the delicate equilibrium that allowed her to function effectively within her role. The doctor never directly addressed the question of whether contentment achieved through such careful management could be considered genuine happiness. Margaret's visits had resumed their normal frequency, though their conversations carried an undertone of careful monitoring that hadn't existed before the escape attempt. Both sisters understood that their relationship now served as an indicator of Camilla's stability. Too much family contact might suggest renewed dissatisfaction with palace life, while too little might indicate dangerous isolation. They had learned to express their genuine affection within parameters that satisfied institutional concerns about security and loyalty. The turning point came during a routine charity visit to the same women's shelter where Camilla had first discovered her sense of purpose. She was listening to testimonials from women who had successfully rebuilt their lives after escaping dangerous situations when one story struck her with unexpected force. A young mother described the moment. She had finally accepted that dreams of perfect freedom had to be balanced against the reality of providing safety and stability for her children. I stopped asking whether I was completely happy, the woman said, and started asking whether I was safe and whether my children could thrive. That changed everything for me. Camilla recognized something profound in those words that applied to her own situation. She had been measuring her life against an impossible standard of perfect autonomy, while overlooking the real securities and opportunities that royal life provided. The palace might be a prison, but it was also a platform from which she could influence positive change in ways that would have been impossible as a private citizen. That evening, she shared this insight with Charles during their first genuinely intimate conversation in months. They were in their private sitting room, away from the formal spaces where they typically discussed official matters. And for once, the conversation felt like a dialogue between husband and wife rather than a briefing between colleagues. "I think I've been asking the wrong questions," she told him. "Instead of asking whether I'm free, I should be asking whether I'm useful. Instead of asking whether I'm happy, I should be asking whether I'm making a difference." Charles seemed genuinely moved by her words. "And what answers do you find to those questions?" "I find that I am useful. The work I'm doing matters to people who need help, and I find that making a difference is its own form of happiness, even if it's not the kind I once imagined for myself." They talked late into the night about the possibilities for expanding her charitable work, about finding new ways to use her position for positive impact, about building a life together that honored both duty and personal fulfillment. It was the first time since her failed escape that Camilla felt like a partner in shaping her own future, Rather than a subject being managed by others, the Queen requested another private audience the following spring, this time to discuss Camilla's long-term role within the royal family. The conversation took place in the same study where Camilla had once feared for her future, but the atmosphere was markedly different. There was respect rather than wariness in the Queen's manner, recognition of successful adaptation rather than concern about potential disruption. "Your charitable work has been exemplary," the Queen said. "More than that, it's demonstrated something important about finding authentic purpose within royal constraints. Thank you, Your Majesty. The work has given me something I didn't realize I was missing, and a sense that my position serves a purpose beyond ceremony and tradition. That understanding marks the difference between someone who merely performs royal duties and someone who embodies them," the Queen observed. "You've learned to make the role truly your own, while respecting its institutional requirements." Camilla felt a complex mix of pride and melancholy at this recognition. She had succeeded in becoming what the institution needed her to be, but that success had required abandoning dreams of who she might have been under different circumstances. The cottage by the lake had faded from a tangible possibility to a wistful memory, replaced by satisfactions that were real but constrained by royal protocols. As summer approached, Camilla found herself reflecting on the transformation that had taken place since that desperate day, when she had packed her suitcases in secret. The woman who had attempted that escape felt like someone from another lifetime, younger, more idealistic, less aware of the complexities involved in balancing personal desires against institutional responsibilities. She no longer woke up each morning, wondering who she was supposed to be that day. Instead, she had crafted an identity that felt authentic within the available parameters. A royal family member who used her position to advocate for vulnerable women, a wife who had learned to find intimacy within formal constraints, a public figure who had discovered genuine purpose in ceremonial duties. The suitcases from her failed escape attempt still sat in storage somewhere in the palace basement, along with evidence from what security reports continued to call the incident. Sometimes Camilla wondered what had happened to the carefully packed mementos and personal treasures that had represented her hopes for a different life. But increasingly, she found that she didn't need those physical reminders of who she had been before joining the royal family. She had learned to carry her authentic self within the elaborate structures of royal life, finding ways to honor her values and passions while fulfilling duties that had once felt oppressive. The freedom she had sought through escape had been replaced by a different kind of liberation, the peace that comes from no longer fighting against immutable circumstances, and instead finding ways to thrive within them. Whether this represented triumph or defeat remained a question that Camilla had stopped asking. The answer mattered less than the life she had built, the work she was doing, and the quiet satisfaction of having found a sustainable way to be herself within a role she had never chosen, but had finally learned to inhabit with dignity and purpose.